democracia, la libertad y los derechos humanos. Los países se han comprometido con estos valores a través de instrumentos legales como la Carta Democrática Interamericana, la Convención Americana de Derechos Humanos y todas las demás convenciones interamericanas. Nuestro trabajo es mantener los más altos estándares. Debemos ser objetivos, analizar los hechos, denunciar cuando veamos corrupción, inequidad o amenazas a la libertad. En esos casos no podemos ser neutrales.
More than 100 years since the inauguration of this building, the OAS headquarters, our institution still brings together the peoples of the Americas to address our responsibilities as a partnership of nations. As we look to the future, our work must also focus on the construction of a positive agenda that continues to favorably impact millions of lives every day.
Development cooperation has always been a priority for the OAS. The OAS SETI works with all member states to identify common challenges and define solutions through policy dialogue, which is transformed into action through technical cooperation initiatives. Policy dialogue is central to our work in development. The OAS SETI convenes development leaders in 11 ministerial meetings and high-level processes on priority areas such as competitiveness, labor, education, among others. Technical cooperation initiatives emerge from ongoing dialogue and are therefore established with built-in political support. All of our actions place people at the center, generating a multiplier effect in the region. We enhance human capacity by working with key stakeholders. This strengthens institutions, improving policies and programs, benefiting millions of people in the Americas. our ability to deliver results relies on broad collaboration. Partnerships for Development, Cooperación Solidaria, is a unique OAS concept which recognizes that each member state, regardless of its size, wealth, or level of development, has value to share and can learn from others. This concept also includes close collaboration with other partners, amplifying our reach and impact. As we mark 70 years of work on development, we take a look back. This long evolution, driven by member states, has fine-tuned our unique model to support inter-American development. Today, all of our efforts fall into 5 strategic priorities: inclusive and competitive economies, sustainable development, education and human development, decent work for all, development cooperation, and partnerships. These are aligned with the Sustainable Development Goals and the regional attainment of the 2030 Agenda. These priorities are also areas where the OAS setting has extensive experience and proven impact. We have come a long way. But still have much work to do. "70 years ago, an inter-American dream and promise was enshrined in the OAS Charter. We can deliver on this promise. Our future leaders are counting on us."
Perfecto, lo escuchamos y lo vemos muy bien.
Me and my kids have been there for over an year right now. And children are friends. It doesn't matter where they come from.
Nosotros estamos en una zona netamente selvática. La línea de adyacencia va desde el norte hasta el sur, va desde Modesto Méndez hasta Aguas Turbias, tanto en el norte como en el sur. Esta línea tiene 215 kilómetros de extensión.
De allí vino él, se buscó creo con los de la OEA y de allí vino el proyecto para acá, para Judá. Y fue que lo dieron el terreno, y lo dieron todo lo que era mano de obra y el material para hacer las casas que están ahorita. Y por ese motivo estamos aquí viviendo todavía.
La misión continúa trabajando en la implementación de medidas de fomento de la confianza mientras se aguarda el resultado del reclamo que está atendiendo la Corte Internacional de Justicia por la disputa marítima, territorial e insular. Nuestra oficina en la zona de adyacencia realiza verificaciones a solicitud de ambos gobiernos, facilita reuniones y patrullajes conjuntos entre las Fuerzas Armadas y promueve una cultura de paz y cooperación entre las comunidades locales.
Children will be children. And they have harmony. They don't see each other as a different country, but they see each other that they're growing together.
Estados Unidos fue.
Esta organización es el guardián regional en defensa de la democracia, la libertad y los derechos humanos. Los países se han comprometido con estos valores a través de instrumentos legales como la Carta Democrática Interamericana, la Convención Americana de Derechos Humanos y todas las demás convenciones interamericanas. Nuestro trabajo es mantener los más altos estándares. Debemos ser objetivos, analizar los hechos, denunciar cuando veamos corrupción, inequidad o amenazas a la libertad. En esos casos no podemos ser neutrales.
More than 100 years since the inauguration of this building, the OAS headquarters, our institution still brings together the peoples of the Americas to address our responsibilities as a partnership of nations. As we look to the future, our work must also focus on the construction of a positive agenda that continues to favorably impact millions of lives every day.
Development cooperation has always been a priority for the OAS. The OAS SETI works with all member states to identify common challenges and define solutions through policy dialogue, which is transformed into action through technical cooperation initiatives. Policy dialogue is central to our work in development. The OAS SETI convenes development leaders in 11 ministerial meetings and high-level processes on priority areas such as competitiveness, labor, education, among others. Technical cooperation initiatives emerge from ongoing dialogue and are therefore established with built-in political support. All of our actions place people at the center, generating a multiplier effect in the region. We enhance human capacity by working with key stakeholders. This strengthens institutions, improving policies and programs, benefiting millions of people in the Americas. Our ability to deliver results relies on broad collaboration. Partnerships for Development, Cooperación Solidaria, is a unique OAS concept which recognizes that each member state, regardless of its size, wealth, or level of development, has value to share and can learn from others. This concept also includes close collaboration with other partners, amplifying our reach and impact. As we mark 70 years of work on development, we take a look back. This long evolution, driven by member states, has fine-tuned our unique model to support inter-American development. Today, all of our efforts fall into 5 strategic priorities: inclusive and competitive economies, sustainable development, education and human development, decent work for all, development cooperation, and partnerships. These are aligned with the Sustainable Development Goals and the regional attainment of the 2030 Agenda. These priorities are also areas where the OAS SETI has extensive experience and proven impact. We have come a long way. But still have much work to do. "70 years ago, an inter-American dream and promise was enshrined in the OAS Charter. We can deliver on this promise. Our future leaders are counting on us."
Thank you very much. They're counting you for quorum.
Me and my kids have been there for over an year right now. And children are friends. It doesn't matter where they come from.
Nosotros estamos en una zona netamente selvática. La línea de adyacencia va desde el norte hasta el sur, va desde Modesto Méndez hasta Aguas Turbias, tanto en el norte como en el sur. Esta línea tiene 215 kilómetros de extensión.
De allí vino él, se buscó creo con los de la OEA y de allí vino el proyecto para acá, para Judá. Y fue que lo dieron el terreno, y lo dieron todo que era mano de obra y el material para hacer las casas que están ahorita. Y por ese motivo estamos aquí viviendo todavía.
La misión continúa trabajando en la implementación de medidas de fomento de la confianza mientras se aguarda el resultado del reclamo que está atendiendo la Corte Internacional de Justicia por la disputa marítima, territorial e insular. Nuestra oficina en la zona de adyacencia realiza verificaciones a solicitud de ambos gobiernos, facilita reuniones y patrullajes conjuntos entre las Fuerzas Armadas y promueve una cultura de paz y cooperación entre las comunidades locales.
Children will be children. And they have harmony. They don't see each other as a different country, but they see each other that they're growing together.
Testing room and test your camera, your microphone. I will put the link in the messaging.
Hoy, esta organización es el guardián regional en defensa de la democracia, la libertad y los derechos humanos. Los países se han comprometido con estos valores a través de instrumentos legales como la Carta Democrática Interamericana, la Convención Americana de Derechos Humanos y todas las demás convenciones interamericanas. Nuestro trabajo es mantener los más altos estándares. Debemos ser objetivos, analizar los hechos, denunciar cuando veamos corrupción, inequidad o amenazas a la libertad. En esos casos no podemos ser neutrales.
More than 100 years since the inauguration of this building, the OAS headquarters, our institution still brings together the peoples of the Americas to address our responsibilities as a partnership of nations. As we look to the future, our work must also focus on the construction of a positive agenda that continues to favorably impact millions of lives every day.
Development cooperation has always been a priority for the OAS. The OAS study works with all member states to identify common challenges and define solutions through policy dialogue, which is transformed into action through technical cooperation initiatives. Policy dialogue is central to our work in development. The OAS study convenes development leaders in 11 ministerial meetings and high-level processes on priority areas such as competitiveness, labor, education, among others. Technical cooperation initiatives emerge from ongoing dialogue and are therefore established with built-in political support. All of our actions place people at the center, generating a multiplier effect in the region. We enhance human capacity by working with key stakeholders. This strengthens institutions, improving policies and programs, benefiting millions of people in the Americas. Our ability to deliver results relies on broad collaboration. Partnerships for Development, Cooperación Solidaria, is a unique OAS concept which recognizes that each member state, regardless of its size, wealth, or level of development, has value to share and can learn from others. This concept also includes close collaboration with other partners, amplifying our reach and impact. As we mark 70 years of work on development, we take a look back. This long evolution, driven by member states, has fine-tuned our unique model to support inter-American development. Today, all of our efforts fall into 5 strategic priorities: inclusive and competitive economies, sustainable development, education and human development, decent work for all, development cooperation, and partnerships. These are aligned with the Sustainable Development Goals and the regional attainment of the 2030 Agenda. These priorities are also areas where the OAS SETI has extensive experience and proven impact.
Leonardo was here, Ambassador. Let me just. We do have quorum, but I would like them to let you know we have 20 countries. Carmen Lucia is getting in.
Mm-hmm.
Good afternoon, everyone. Vice Chair. Yes, indeed, we have quorum. You can start the meeting, Ambassador.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon again, colleagues. The President is going to be absent this afternoon. He's been called away on urgent business. So I am unfortunately the face that you'll be seeing for the next 3 hours. Anyway, good evening again. We shall now continue the dialogue of the heads of delegation on the theme of this regular session of the General Assembly, facing the challenges of COVID-19 in the hemisphere, a collaborative approach to address vulnerabilities and build resilience in times of crisis based on the 4 pillars of the Organization of American States. I remind heads of delegation, though I believe I'm wasting my time here, that they will make their presentations in slots of 6 minutes and in the previously agreed upon format. I also remind you that in accordance with this agreement, the time allocated to delegations is 6 minutes, and we are trying desperately to keep to that to ensure that we're not here at midnight tomorrow night. Accordingly, I am now pleased to offer the floor to the head of delegation of Bolivia. Forgive me if I'm not pronouncing the name absolutely correctly, Her Excellency Karen Longorak Rodriguez. Foreign Minister, you have the floor.
Thank you. Chairman of the Assembly, Foreign Ministers, Secretary General, Assistant Secretary General, permanent observers. The region is facing challenges that hemispheric multilateralism had never before seen, and it affects the pillars of the OAS. On the one hand, the COVID-19 pandemic affects economies and is testing the health capabilities of our countries. The pandemic and its social and economic effects are devastating, and they are jeopardizing the life of thousands of citizens in the region. Given this challenge, Bolivia believes that only joint action and collective cooperation with solidarity by the countries, by the member states of this organization will make it possible to address the pandemic and its devastating effects. In order to protect the health and life of citizens in the region, it is fundamental to guarantee universal access at low cost to vaccines that in the near future will be approved, so that everybody may benefit from life-giving immunization. We must therefore strengthen regional initiatives through PAHO mechanisms. Likewise, we must focus on reactivating our economies and productive development in the framework of a sustainable economic policy. To this end, we must deepen regional cooperation and strengthen our trade links and regional integration mechanisms using a pragmatic and without ideology kind of approach. The basis, ideological radicalism, violation of human rights, and interference in internal matters of other states, on the other hand, are an attempt against the democratic principles, yet another of the OAS fundamental pillars. On 23 January this year, it was my honor to participate at an extraordinary session of the OAS Permanent Council, at which I indicated that the most important objective in the chairmanship by the Agnes was to conduct the new elections, that they be democratic, transparent, and inclusive. Today, I can proudly tell you we have achieved it. 2 days ago, the people of Bolivia went to vote in the presidential elections conducted under international observation in compliance with the highest standards when it comes to electoral processes. The people of Bolivia expressed their will at the ballots in a democratic and inclusive manner. The deployment of the 2 electoral observation missions and the integrity analysis team were fundamental to assure the transparency of the election. Electoral fraud that occurred last year, denounced by the OAS and the European Union, was an affront to the political will for citizens to be able to freely express their vote and with transparency. To deny last year's fraud is to deny the appropriateness of the OAS as a support for democracies in the continent, and it also puts in doubt the credibility of the European Union. The UN High Commissioner's report points out that the violence occurred in October, November last year in Bolivia arise from the fraud conducted by the prior government. The general elections that took place in Bolivia just a couple of days ago placed the confidence of the people in a new government that will have the inescapable commitment and mandate to have a prosperous administration that will benefit the entire population, that will benefit Bolivia without any exceptions, with no discrimination. It will also have the obligation to delivering to the citizens the best health conditions to combat COVID-19 with a solid basis set by the government of Ms. Agnes. My government thanks the OAS, the Secretary General, and the European Union for the support received in this important phase and for having monitored the rights and exercise of rights by Bolivians. Chairman, foreign ministers, and heads of delegation. Throughout this year, Bolivia has made efforts to implement policies and strategies to combat drug trafficking. This struggle in recent past was not part of a state policy. In a short time frame, this government has seized lots of drugs and has broken down drug trafficking groups. Bolivia, furthermore, has conducted and made strides to combat the trafficking in persons, recategorizing thus the country in the annual report published by the United States Department of State. Integral development is yet another of the fundamental pillars of the organization, and it is required for the growth and strengthening of our nations. It is precisely at times such as present that we realize how essential it is to strengthen integral development in all its dimensions. I'd like to underscore the word of the Inter-American Commission for Integral Development, as well as that of the Executive Secretariat for Integral Development. In particular, the efforts relating to supporting the MSMEs, the motor that drives growth. We urge SEDI to continue with its program for digitization of MSMEs in the Americas through technical cooperation and providing training, both for small entrepreneurs as well as ministries and vice ministries responsible for supporting this important sector in order to reactivate our economies. Another aspect worth mentioning is the response to natural disasters generated by climate change, a phenomenon that afflicts our hemisphere. 2019, Bolivia lost over 5 million hectares in an unprecedented fire. This year, more than 1.5 million hectares were ravaged by fire, and we fear this might be a recurrent event that we will be seeing year after year. The natural forests account for over 40% of the surface of Bolivia and 10% of tropical forest in South America. Therefore, their protection is a benefit for all countries. Fires have reached areas with the greatest biodiversity in the country. Some are even being World Heritage. This is a serious problem. It requires cooperation from the international community in order to be tackled, just as impacting the habitat of indigenous peoples. President, delegates, my country welcomed the invitation from Chilean authorities to reinitiate the dialogue in a climate of confidence that ought never have been interrupted. Joint response to COVID-19 and repatriation of Bolivian citizens from Chilean territory have demonstrated that our people can indeed work together. We must give priority to dialogue and cooperation. Bolivia, in that spirit, will seek to resolve problems that still persist, such as access to the Pacific Ocean. Our historical differences can be tackled through developing an agenda that contemplates in the not too distant future the reestablishment of diplomatic dialogues to have mutually beneficial negotiations. We will strengthen direct dialogue, also supported by the instruments that offered to us by multilateralism and integration to find solutions that will contribute to our being good neighbors. Thank you very much.
I thank the Foreign Minister of Bolivia. We congratulate Bolivia on the performance of the Bolivian people and their adherence to democracy in last Sunday's election. Wish Bolivia well. Now, as you know, the presentations are being made both virtually and live, and the next speaker will be a tape recording, which we already have, I believe. And I now introduce the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Brazil, His Excellency Ernesto Araújo.
Darren Henfield, Foreign Minister of the Bahamas, whom I congratulate for having been elected as President of this General Assembly of the Organization of American States. Minister, Secretary General of the OAS, my friend Mr. Almagro, Assistant Secretary General Nestor Mendes, ladies and gentlemen. This year, the regular session of the General Assembly is occurring at a time that is a major challenge for our hemisphere. The General Secretariat and our country's missions have had to find different ways to maintain the organization functioning despite the pandemic. I do regret each one of the human lives lost due to the pandemic, and I reiterate Brazil's commitment to cooperate in dealing with this pandemic and its consequences, and will do so with all the nations in the hemisphere. COVID cannot be a reason to slip back with our core objectives within the organization: democracy, security, and development. Quite on the contrary, we need to continue pursuing these goals with greater determination and a stronger agenda. The challenges of the pandemic cannot be a pretext for mandates already agreed within the organization be set aside. We cannot lose the efforts that have already been achieved to strengthen democracies and full re-establishment everywhere in the hemisphere where needed. Brazil would do everything possible to avoid that in the context of the pandemic, anti-democratic regimes try to benefit from a reorientation of international priorities. The health crisis cannot serve as an excuse either to violate human rights by these regimes. The Charter of the Organization and other instruments, such as Inter-American Democratic Charter, have assumed a commitment to protect human rights and democracy in the continent. We have a moral duty and political responsibility to respect the commitments assumed by each one of us. The OAS is, above everything else, the house of democracy in the Americas. That is how Brazil views the organization. The efforts of member countries who have worked strongly to achieve this ideal, and therefore I'm so proud to include Brazil in this effort. And in particular, I'd like to underscore the work of the Secretary General, Luis Almagro, in favor of democracy in the continent. We face new threats to democracy and human rights in the Americas. Threats due to political positions and their association with organized crime. We need to recognize these threats because of what they are, not what we would like them to be. The OAS cannot be a space for political discourse. It needs to be a space to drive democracies, to formulate ideas and concrete actions to defend truth and justice. Increasingly in the hemisphere, we are seeing the involvement between totalitarian projects, whether they be Forum of Sao Paulo or socialism or whatever you want to call it, and its association and links with crime in all its forms. Crimes such as drug trafficking, terrorism, smuggling of persons, corruption, etc. This criminal pact with the policy with parties is something that we need to study, understand, and combat. We can do it. We can overcome it, and that way build a region that is truly free, as was the dream of our founders, prosperous, safe. Otherwise, we would see a gigantic area of crime and oppression in the region. Mr. President, the situation in Venezuela today shows everything we don't want to see, and what could happen if we don't take action. Venezuela is the front line where the democratic ideal is confronted with the criminal political complex, a somber image of new totalitarian regimes. It is not only a government that is taking away all the freedoms from all its people. It's more than that. It's a perverse mechanism for social, economic, and moral deconstruction, not only in Venezuela, but for all Latin American nations. It is part of a hemispheric network that has tried to conquer power throughout the region. It's sad to see that Venezuela, with its democratic traditions, its wealth, its riches, has now become a temple to tyranny that inspires those harmful images that want to transmit that same nightmare to the entire region. Fortunately, Venezuela is trying to attempt against this, and we need to change it. Venezuela can and may return to being a free and grand nation. Venezuela can be a major struggle for a battle for freedom, to restore peace and justice, if we are not afraid of deploying our convictions and our ideals. The dictatorial regime in Venezuela is supported by that complex, that involvement with organized crime. The regime is part of that complex. The humanitarian tragedy is deteriorating day by day. Violence of the illegitimate regime against its population continues, as well as the blockade for international assistance. The crimes committed by the Maduro regime have been once again brought to light by the report of the verification mission sent to Venezuela. Given all of this, Brazil urges the entire international community to mobilize in favor of a return of democracy to Venezuela. Countries that currently are providing some kind of support to the dictatorship, to the Maduro tyranny, whether it be voluntarily or through omission, should think about the people in Venezuela whose human rights are being violated. All countries need to understand that Venezuela today is not simply a classical process of a difficult transition towards democracy, much less a simple ideological matter. It's a confrontation between freedoms and rights on the one hand, and on the other hand, crime. Countries where there is terrorism, that are against terrorism, cannot support countries such as Venezuela. Countries that believe in human rights cannot support the policies adopted by the Maduro government. People or countries that believe in self-determination cannot continue supporting a system such as having pseudo-elections in 2018 and the pseudo-elections coming up. Self-determination by people belongs to people and not to the tyrannies oppressing them. Let us be clear. The Maduro regime derives its power from a criminal structure. We're not talking about a normal political actor. There are lots of evidence of association with crimes, such as the report of human rights on the matter of the Orinoco mining district. These things need to continue to be investigated and brought to light. The regime has no legitimacy to convene or to conduct a clean, fair election process. The fraud for the elections that are convened for December has to be rejected firmly by the international community. Rapid transition to democracy conducted by Venezuelans themselves is the correct path for stability, recovery, and a return to prosperity, and to reignite hope in all these values, freedom, security, etc., prevail throughout the hemisphere. Brazil is convinced that this General Assembly should be a fundamental stepping stone for that achievement. One of the chief outcomes ought to be approval of a resolution having to do with Venezuela, with specific mandates against the Maduro plan and in favor of democracy. We continue wanting to support efforts by Venezuelan citizens to reach a peaceful, prosperous, and democratic future. Brazil, through its program of welcome, has received thousands and thousands of Venezuelan citizens seeking refuge on Brazilian territory. We are convinced that the only solution for the humanitarian problem in Venezuela is full return of that country to democracy. On another front, Mr. President, we must devote our best efforts to find joint solutions to the anti-democratic relations of Daniel Ortega in Nicaragua. Among other initiatives, it's necessary and urgent to reform the electoral system in that country. We must find ways to respond to the legitimate demands of Nicaraguan people, such as return to the mechanism of the Human Rights Commission and the Committee of the OAS Permanent Council. We want Nicaragua to participate in good faith to bring an end to this situation. Dear colleagues, the government of Brazil is committed in fighting organized crime, transnational organized crime. Our participation is increasingly stronger. It is coordinated in working with other institutions to combat terrorism, working to defend democracy and seeking development is a single system. It's one and the same. Brazil is firmly committed to the inter-American human rights system, including supporting the reform agenda from the CIDH. We also firmly advocate for religious freedom and families and the full equality between men and women. All of these actions are important. The OAS is a privileged place where we are able to promote these elements together: democracy, human rights, security, development. Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, ministers, let me here appeal that for us to continue struggling fight to protect our hemisphere, respecting democracy, human rights, promoting security and development of our people. 200 years after independence, having to do with the colonial regime, our ideals today require a new independence, an independence when facing the political criminal union. Brazil continues to support OAS initiatives from a perspective that brings together all the dimensions of this organization's endeavors. I therefore reaffirm the commitment of President Bolsonaro and his government to place Brazil unequivocally next to the ideals that are dearest to our people represented in this organization and centered on the sacred value of freedom. Thank you very much.
I thank the distinguished Foreign Minister of Brazil, and I remind colleagues that this morning the delegation of the Bahamas swapped places with the delegation of Canada, and therefore I now have the pleasure to invite my good friend, the Ambassador of the Bahamas, His Excellency Sidney Colley, to address the Assembly. Ambassador Colley, you have the floor. Do we have Ambassador Colley?
I don't see him. Let me check in the list.
If not, Assistant Secretary General, I'll be guided by you. Should
Yes.
we move on to the next speaker, or have we found Ambassador?
Sorry,
Oh.
we have him now.
He's here now. Ambassador Colley, I invite you again to take the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Distinguished foreign ministers, Secretary General and Assistant Secretary General, ambassadors, and other diplomatic representatives. Permit me at the outset to express on behalf of the government and people of the Bahamas solidarity with member states and the people of the Americas as we battle the economic, social impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic. Excellencies, I am certain that in 1971, when the first regular session of the General Assembly was celebrated in San Jose, Costa Rica, member states, as forward-thinking as they were, could not have imagined that the momentous 50th meeting of the General Assembly would be held in such a manner. That the foreign ministers and diplomatic representatives of the 34 active member states of this august organization would meet with each other not in a beautiful hall, but through our computer screens. That we would be separated not by country nameplates, chairs, and microphones, but by borders, oceans, and time zones. Excellencies, as you know, the Bahamas was preparing to welcome you to our shores to celebrate this auspicious occasion. But the threat of COVID-19 pandemic forced our government to withdraw from hosting this 50th regular session of the General Assembly under the theme, Building Resilience to Secure Our Future. We hope that the Assembly would boost the spirit of the Bahamian people who suffered immensely as a result of Hurricane Dorian last September, and be a rallying call for the countries of the hemisphere to focus on resilience as a critical element in overcoming the myriad of challenges faced by our region. The Bahamas is pleased, therefore, that our proposed theme has resonated and that member states have chosen for this year's General Assembly the theme, Facing the Challenges of COVID-19 in the Hemisphere, a collaborative approach to address vulnerabilities and build resilience in times of crisis, based on the 4 pillars of the OAS. The Bahamas is no stranger to such vulnerabilities. The Bahamas experienced major hurricanes in 2015, 2016, 2017, and 2019. Hurricane Dorian, the largest Atlantic storm in recorded history. On 1st September 2019, Hurricane Dorian, an unprecedented destructive force of wind, rain, and sea surge, ripped into the islands of the northern Bahamas. And what the Prime Minister of the Bahamas, the Most Honorable Hubert Minnis, has described as a generational tragedy for our country. The Honorable Secretary General, Luis Almagro, in his visit to the Bahamas in the immediate aftermath of Dorian, noted that enhanced response to natural disasters requires the efforts of the entire international community, not just those of us more vulnerable to the effects of climate change. The Secretary General stated, and I quote, "The OAS has the responsibility and obligation to place climate change and green energy at the top of the hemispheric agenda. Not doing so will mean more human and material costs, like those experienced with Hurricane Dorian." End of quote. The 2020 Atlantic hurricane season is only 3 named storms away from becoming the most active hurricane seasons on record. The frequency and intensity of these storms are no doubt aggravated by climate change, an existential threat to our region. Just 6 months after the passage of Hurricane Dorian, the Bahamas, like all countries of this region, was faced with a health crisis known as COVID-19. With an economy that relies heavily on tourism, the closure of our borders and restriction in the movement of people has resulted in a severe slowdown in the country's economic activity. It is the price we pay for protecting the health of our citizens and those within our borders. Excellencies, the exogenous shocks of climate-related events, coupled with the effects of the global pandemic, have highlighted the importance of doing away with outmoded methodologies such as the use of GDP per capita, which has already been mentioned by a number of delegations previous, in determining access to concessionary financing. Such methodologies give no consideration to a country's vulnerability to existential threats and ability to recover from these external shocks. We are grateful, therefore, for the organization's commitment to advocate for a review of the per capita income criterion. The impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic on our region are further exacerbated by the effects of climate change. We are pleased, therefore, to co-sponsor, along with CARICOM, the draft resolution advancing the hemispheric response to climate change in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic. This will require new financial mechanisms to assist member states in responding to the joint crisis of the COVID-19 pandemic. In similar manner, the work of OAS towards strengthening its facilitative role in natural disaster preparedness and response in the America must continue unabated. For many small member states like the Bahamas, the OAS is one of the few global institutions where there's broad accessibility to technical assistance, particularly for development projects. When compared with other multilateral bodies, we believe that the OAS maintains comparative advantages and provides value added in the areas of capacity building, technical cooperation, and support for human development, which are more important than ever before. Excellencies, as a global recession looms before us, I wish to encourage member states in fulfilling their annual assessed contributions, the lifeblood of the organization. The OAS cannot continue to move from one fiscal crisis to another. It also cannot continue to operate in an imbalanced manner. The 4 pillars of the OAS are essential to the theme of this year's virtual assembly. We therefore look forward to the principle of equity being applied to the financing of the 4 pillars. In conclusion, Excellencies, the Bahamas continues to believe that the organization has a critical role to play in regional and global affairs. Since the first session of the General Assembly in 1971, the organization has weathered tumultuous economic, social, and political crises and has grown its membership to 35 states of the hemisphere. Now more than ever, a collaborative, multilateral approach is required to overcome the contemporary challenges before us. Small island development states like the Bahamas often find ourselves in recurrent recovery mode, cycling from one crisis to the next. We remain steadfast, however, in our belief in the organization's capacity to assist member states in building resilience as we confront the reality of the many challenges that continue to evolve in the economic, social, and environmental spheres of the lives of the citizens of the Americas. Steady leadership is required to navigate our region through the difficult times, and the Bahamas congratulates Secretary General Almagro and Assistant Secretary General Mendez on their re-election and return to the helm of the ship of state. Excellencies, though we are far apart, our countries remain inextricably linked. Therefore, we must collaborate to combat the challenges ahead. We must unify in what the Prime Minister of Bahamas calls the spirit of, quote, we. In the Bahamas, you will find an engaged and responsible partner for the task at hand. I thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the distinguished Ambassador of Bahamas. And now I give the floor to the distinguished Minister of Foreign Affairs of Chile, His Excellency Andres Ayamat. Your Excellency.
Ministers and Ministers of Foreign Affairs, Secretary General, Assistant Secretary General, delegates all. Chile places a priority importance on the OAS in peacekeeping and in the keeping of security, in promoting and assuring democracy, respect for human rights, and encouraging economic growth that is both sustainable and supportive. Therefore, we are seeking to work better in terms of our governance and in renewable efforts. Ladies and gentlemen, foreign ministers, Latin America has become one of the regions that has been hardest hit by COVID-19, in part due to the precarious nature of our healthcare, social security systems, and our systems that have been unable to overcome our strong inequalities. ECLAC and other institutions envision that there will be over 50 million new poor and a tremendous impact on our middle classes that may slip back into conditions that they believe they had left behind. We need to undertake all joint efforts and continue in this same line in an effort to institute a series of effort with the support of the international financial institutions with a view toward contributing to the reactivation and rebuilding with an accent on those areas that have been hardest hit by this crisis. Ladies and gentlemen, fellow foreign ministers, a range of international reports have not been hopeful in terms of looking at the status of democracy. Several have referred to 2019 as a year of democratic backsliding across the globe. The fact that there is evidence that the region shows growing difficulties should be a matter of the utmost concern and should lead us to timely thinking that will enable us to get ahead of issues that are easy to regret and extremely difficult to revert. In any case, Mr. Chair, I would like to take advantage of this opportunity to once again reiterate the congratulations and the best wishes in the leadership that President Sebastián Piñera noted yesterday to the president-elect of Bolivia, Mr. Luis Arce. We reiterate Chile's commitment to making progress in our bilateral relationship and to strengthen regional integration. Please allow me also to add that Chile, starting with the Treaty of 1904 and the Hague ruling of 2018, which are the cornerstone of our relationship, keeps open its willingness to engage in dialogue with Bolivia to strengthen collaboration in areas of bilateral interest. The government that I represent has been clear in implementing, when circumstances so recommend it, a policy that we call progressive approximation toward Bolivia in an effort to address a agenda looking to the future, grounded in diplomacy, so that Chile and Bolivia can be able to transform our grievances of the past into new points of convergence. Ladies and gentlemen, Venezuela and Nicaragua today command our attention. Venezuela in December will be holding parliamentary elections that lack all possible legitimacy. Having the dictatorial regime discarded any possibility of giving minimum assurances for their legitimacy. We see increasing systemization of violations of human rights, moreover, as we have recently seen by the recent fact-finding mission led by the United Nations and the report by the High Commissioner for Human Rights, Michelle Bachelet. Chile, in addition to reaffirming its conviction that the only possible outcome to this devastating situation must be decisive and decided by Venezuelans themselves democratically, would like to focus on the cornerstones of this assembly and insist that all possible actions with regard to the future of Venezuela must aim to dovetail increasingly and most urgently and command our attention. Since 2018, Chile has condemned violence, the repression of civil society, the violations of human rights, the persecution of political opposition, and in general, the deterioration of the democratic institutions in Venezuela. For these reasons, Chile will support as well the resolution on Nicaragua that calls also for changes in that country as well, with a view toward free and fair presidential and congressional elections in 2021 to allow for electoral observation missions, as well as for the presence of the Inter-American Human Rights Commission. Ladies and gentlemen, fellow foreign ministers, allow me to briefly share with you one thought about the situation in my own country. A year ago, Chile underwent a social upheaval with tremendous levels of violence and a large number of peaceful protests, despite its progress in recent decades. Chile has channeled its response to the social uprising through an institutional and democratic process. On Sunday, October 25th, we will hold a plebiscite with a view towards the crafting of a new constitution. We will also next year have presidential and regional elections. Chile is confident in the solidity of its democracy and its institutions, and in its capability to isolate within the context of the rule of law of the violent groups that seek to alter the chosen constitutional process and the rule of law in Chile. The government will continue to exercise its legitimate and legal tools to ensure a more robust system and a more cohesive society. Thank you.
Thank the distinguished Foreign Minister of Chile. And now I give the floor to the distinguished Foreign Minister of Colombia, Her Excellency Claudia Blum. Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair of the General Assembly, Secretary General Luis Almagro, Assistant Secretary General Nestor Mendez, Ministers of Foreign Affairs, and heads of delegation. Ladies and gentlemen, it is an honor for me to greet you and to participate in this dialogue in the context of the General Assembly of the organization. 2020 has been a difficult year indeed. The impact of COVID-19 has affected us all in our daily lives, in public health, employment, our economies, social development, and well-being. Colombia expresses its solidarity to the thousands of families who have lost their loved ones as a result of this health crisis. For the OAS, this time is one that requires cooperation and solidarity to put forward our responses to the pandemic in the context of the pillars of the organization. As Secretary General Almagro has noted, given our current situation, we must respond with more democracy and systems that allow for the long-term recovery of our institutions while strengthening them and ensuring respect for human rights. Mr. Chair, the government of Ivan Duque is implementing the plan for a commitment by Colombia that contains 4 pillars as well for our social and economic recovery. This is employment generation, clean growth, support for the most vulnerable and impoverished, and a commitment to peace and legality. My nation has determined to support entrepreneurship and to step up our efforts in infrastructure and in healthcare, rural development, clean power, value chains, and technology. Colombia continues to implement the policy of peace with legality, even in this era of the healthcare crisis. This policy seeks to make progress in the instituting of the 2016 peace accords to consolidate the incorporation of former combatants into society and to continue to move forward in the 170 hardest hit municipalities, that is, of violence and poverty. That is, transitional justice continues to act independently. We recognize the work of the support mission to the peace mission, the MAC OAS, and the support of the countries of the region in the construction of peace with legality. All of our development actions and all of our efforts to rebuild fall within the context of the 2030 Agenda, a roadmap which is fundamental to securing our goals of equality, eradication of poverty, environmental protection, and sustainable growth. The digital transformation is also a cross-cutting element of our development plan. During the pandemic, this process has enabled us to bolster the monitoring of COVID-19 and to take effective measures with regard to the healthcare sector. It has also made it possible for us to engage in telemedicine, telework, e-commerce, education, and provide other services despite the emergency. Mr. Chair, I would like to now refer to the situation in our sister country of Venezuela, which merits the full attention of the hemisphere that continues to become worse within this pandemic. Several months ago, the Supreme Court has appointed illegally the members of the Electoral Committee. In addition, the Nicolas Maduro regime's intent to hold fraudulent elections in December constitutes a threat to the National Assembly, which is the only legitimate and democratic institution that continues to survive in Venezuela. Those elections without due guarantees should not be recognized by the international community. Maduro's attack against the National Assembly and the political parties is a flagrant violation of the Inter-American Charter. The OAS must insist on the hosting of free presidential elections that are transparent, that provide political assurances with an independent arbitrator and international observers as fundamental prerequisites for the recovery of democracy and to initiate social and economic regrowth. The commitment of the regime to international crime and the responsibility for acts of terrorism is also a threat to the security and the stability of the region. We call upon the OAS to apply the principles of non-interference and to ensure that the appropriate principles contained in the UN 1343 resolution are respected. In addition, the Independent Fact-Finding Mission on Venezuela has identified violations of human rights that are systematic in nature, that are crimes against humanity in our view. This comes in conjunction with reports that have been made within the Inter-American system itself of a similar ilk. Therefore, we call upon the OAS to investigate the regime, as well as calling on the International Criminal Court to do the same. Millions of Venezuelans have fled their country, and some 1.8 million of them reside in Colombia. We have facilitated for them access to health care, education, and assistance for the most vulnerable. International cooperation is of the utmost importance in this regard, particularly when we consider that an additional 200,000 migrants will, we expect, enter Colombia in coming months. According, moreover, to the IMF, Latin America and the Caribbean is the region of the world that is hardest hit by COVID-19. Our GDP will drop by 8.1% on average, with an impact on poverty and on inequality. Therefore, we must redouble our efforts at regional cooperation and solidarity to recover our path toward greater equality and growth. Colombia reaffirms its commitment to multilateralism as a framework for addressing the challenges that our region and humanity confront. We acknowledge the role of the Pan American Health Organization in generating responses across the region and in promoting timely, secure access to treatment and a vaccine to prevent COVID-19. We also recognize the political guidelines to avoid COVID-19, which is a contribution from the OAS in terms of the democratic principles in addressing the challenges posed by this health crisis. The OAS can also encourage frameworks and dialogues to help rebuild and build back better. I would like to refer to the Inter-American Business Charter that has been led by President Duque in the context of a meeting in September of 2019. This instrument will enable us to set principles to promote the role of the private sector in the comprehensive development of the region, including the strengthening of micro, small, and mid-sized companies that generate employment, equality, and formality. The initiative is particularly salient in the context of this pandemic, given the need of our nations to jumpstart our economies, well-being, and employment. In this regard, my delegation would like to call for the approval of this mandate so that we can urgently consider, therefore, this Inter-American Business Charter. Distinguished colleagues, in the context of this pandemic, the hemisphere has an opportunity to work jointly to carry forth innovative strategies that allow for our regions and our people's economic and social development. We must do so on the basis of sustainability and inclusion, strengthening cooperation to forge fairer, more peaceful and resilient societies across the Americas. Thank you.
Very much, Minister. And the next speaker will be talking with us via a pre-recording. And so I have great pleasure in introducing the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Costa Rica, His Excellency Rodolfo Solano Quiros.
Mr. President, We'd like to congratulate you on your election to chair this General Assembly, and we wish you the very best of success. We greet all delegations of member states, permanent observers, the General Secretariat of the OAS, and the organization's staff, as well as those who are linked with us remotely because of the global health crisis. We express solidarity to all the peoples of America suffering from the pandemic caused by coronavirus. The challenges are enormous. It will only be possible to address them through strong, renewed multilateralism so that jointly our continent will be able to once again be on the path of sustainable development in keeping with the 2030 agenda. The health crisis has slowed down our economies, increasing poverty and unemployment, growing inequality that, with the loss of biodiversity plus climate change, have become the major challenges facing our region and therefore our organizations. Furthermore, we must also confront a new normalcy, bringing together authoritarian regimes, manipulations and distortions of electoral processes, old and new armed conflict, and the action of certain powers that gain ground in our society. The mixture of economic recession and with deepening of the political crisis and social instability jeopardize the social pact of our region. Mr. President, it is only through an innovative vision with cooperation and solidarity as foundation we will, as sister neighbors, be able to pull forward, hand in hand, head held high, and with human beings being at the center of our concerns and actions. Costa Rica will be on the front line to work unstintingly with a long-term view, together with international partners, to transform the planet and in particular our region. In this task, strengthening regional integration processes are a powerful tool to move towards the targets set for ourselves. As an unarmed democracy, Costa Rica will always advocate for use of all multilateralism tools. We are convinced that only respectful dialogue seeking consensus is the way forward to come out of this crisis, such as the historical record of multilateralism is proof positive. Strengthening international cooperation and development are the drivers to move forward on an integral development agenda. This organization must find means and creative solutions to generate different synergies. You, Mr. President, may count on the commitment of Costa Rica as pro tempore president of ECLAC to promote good practices seeking socioeconomic recovery that is sustainable, taking care of its most vulnerable populations. For those populations suffering from different forms of exclusion, Costa Rica renews its historical commitment as a state policy to respect and guarantee human rights. Despite having overcome some historical debts, such as this year's recognition of equal marriage in my country, there are many challenges that face this continent with our indigenous peoples, Afro-descendants, LGBTI, migrants, elderly, people with disabilities, children, girls, and adolescents. We must continue promoting with all our force women's participation in political agendas, increase of gender violence, the lack of economic empowerment for women, problems to access of sexual and reproductive health, and the greatest vulnerability faced by women in these times of crisis are urgent challenges. We need women's voices in all their diversity without disadvantages to guide us in this new reality. Moreover, defenders of human rights are still attacked because they are playing such an important role, including those who are defending environmental issues. Costa Rica reiterates its invitation to the member states of Latin America and Caribbean to consider accession to the Agreement for Public Participation and Access to Justice in Environmental Matters, known as the Escazú Agreement. All states have a responsibility to strengthen the inter-American human rights system, ensuring gender parity in the makeup of all bodies, protecting the independence of those entities and guaranteeing their financial stability. And in this manner, right to access justice by our people and combating impunity throughout the continent. President, Costa Rica is seriously concerned about the traditional and emerging threats to security in the region, particularly those arising from transnational organized crime. We trust that multilateral efforts will encourage a better regional security, that in these circumstances should also focus on protecting productive activities in order to accelerate the economic recovery in our countries. Mr. President, the political crisis continue in the region. Today, more than ever before, it is necessary for the actors of each one of these situations of confrontation need to come together in an opportunity build that is honest and positive. Costa Rica is convinced that dialogue is a priority tool. It is effective to overcome misunderstandings and to move forward in developing our people. Costa Rica will continue to deplore and condemn the actions for breakdown of democratic institutions and the serious violations against human rights in the hemisphere. Given the systematic actions of Nicolás Maduro's illegitimate regime, Venezuela's institutions are compromised, and right now they have the right conditions for a democratic process. It is up to the Venezuelans, with support from the international community, to take the sharp turn towards democracy, for which a serious united opposition is required that can truly put pressure on the regime and move towards the social and economic reconstruction of that country. Costa Rica also, in this General Assembly of the OAS, wants the right conditions to be found in the Democratic Republic of Nicaragua, with full exercise of freedoms such as holding free and fair elections based on necessary reforms in the terms of the Inter-American Democratic Charter. The government has committed, and there needs to be a responsible political opposition. Mr. President, given the health crisis, the social and economic problems, the environmental devastation and human insecurity, Costa Rica advocates effective multilateralism to have impact on our peoples. Today, more than ever before, we must avail ourselves of the tools of multilateralism to move from words to action. As an example, my country has made three proposals for a healthier, more sustainable and prosperous world. For Costa Rica, health is a global public good. In this sense, we launched, together with the World Health Organization and 40 other countries, the Initiative Z, as a platform to share information, knowledge, and intellectual property, so that tests, treatment, vaccines, and technologies against COVID-19 be accessible to all inhabitants of the planet, of the globe. I call upon member states to join this effort, as well as private enterprise. Costa Rica has also called on the international financial institutions to create a fund to alleviate the COVID-19 economy as a proposal for solidarity given the economic recession resulting from the pandemic. This is a fund to provide extraordinary finance with 0.7% of the GDP of the largest and strongest economies in the world, and these will be loans in favorable conditions with terms that are accessible to emerging countries. This virus is yet another alert, not an early one any longer, about the climate change and inequality. These are the major threats to human security, and that applies to this generation and the next one. It is necessary to ensure sustainable development tools are put into effect, including the Agenda 2030 and the Paris Agreement, as well as actions for effective protection of oceans and their biodiversity. Let us promote the high-level coalition to ensure that 30% of territories, both on land and at sea, be protected by 2030 as a solution based on nature to address the climate crisis. Mr. President, we will overcome this crisis. The question, however, is how? Costa Rica hopes that the new reality will not cause a new pandemic of authoritarian regime. Rather, we'd like to see strengthened democracies and sustainable, inclusive, decarbonized economies that respect human rights. Thank you very much.
Of Costa Rica. And without too much more ado, I will turn directly to the Foreign Minister of Dominica, His Excellency Kenneth Darrow. Excellency, you've got the floor.
His Excellency Louis Lamesa Malbrook, Secretary General of the Organization of American States, His Excellency Ambassador Nestor Mendez, Assistant Secretary General of the Organization of American States, President of the 50th Regular Session of the General Assembly of the OAS, colleague Ministers of Foreign Affairs, permanent representatives of the Organization of American States, invited guests, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. President, I convey greetings from the Honorable Prime Minister of the Commonwealth of Dominica, the Honorable Dr. Rutger Skerrit, and his best wishes for a successful 50th regular session of the General Assembly of this august body. I also address this assembly during an unprecedented time in our history, where our world is contending with the effects of three concurrent crises: the impact of climate change, the COVID-19 pandemic, and the continuing decline in economic growth. At no other time in our recorded history did we have to deal with the onset of three simultaneously occurring crises. Mr. President, our region is faced with the convergence of these three crises that have already produced unimaginable negative consequences to the economies of member states. Projections show that these negative consequences will continue to overwhelm national economies well into 2022 and beyond. Member states were forced to abandon carefully laid economic plans and programs, revise economic projections, and redirect very scarce resources from the most vulnerable sectors to cushion the onslaught of the effects of the coronavirus pandemic. Mr. President, member states, the COVID-19 pandemic has eliminated the undeniable inequality faced by the smallest and the most vulnerable member states of the region to access critical financing necessary to address threats to human existence. The extraordinary and sudden suspension of economic activities, the complete shutdown of our borders, schools, and non-essential services amidst the ongoing hurricane season have placed added pressures on already overburdened systems in many of our countries. The collapse of the tourism industry, which contributed well over $35 billion in foreign exchange receipts in the Caribbean region in the last year, is likely to see contractions of 50% or more in the coming years. The corresponding impact of unemployment, reductions in foreign remittances, another large contribution to GDP, and the corresponding banking and de-risking measures levied against local banking institutions in our region will further compound existing challenges to our financial system and will no doubt further shrink the already limited fiscal base in which we now operate. Mr. President, The financial impact on our health sectors has starkly highlighted the inefficiency of our health system and increased spending levels as high as 4% of GDP in some countries to address this public health crisis. We commend the work of PAHO, WHO, and CAFA, our regional institution, for their leadership roles in the fight against this pandemic. Their invaluable assistance to regional governments has greatly facilitated the protection of its citizens, particularly the most vulnerable in our society, adjustment to healthcare systems, and the implementation of health and safety protocols and standards. The cost to government seeking to ensure that the citizens stay healthy are staggering and are only expected to rise in a pandemic whose duration remains largely uncertain. Healthcare systems must now implement bold reforms to address the inefficiencies and improve the delivery of service to citizens, whilst at the same time reducing cost of services to both government and the very same citizens alike. The OAS must therefore redirect its efforts to effectively address the needs of its smaller, more vulnerable member states that are already facing high indebtedness incurred to rebuild essential and even critical public infrastructure and the economies following natural disasters. In addition, the cost of repositioning national economies to respond to and mitigate against new threats is beyond the reach of small island developing states without the support of our international development partners. Mr. President, the effect of climate change continues to pose threats to our region. Collective political will among nations must be maintained to mitigate the effects of climate change. This is particularly important for the survival of small and low-lying coastal developing states. Coordinated sustained action by member states to combat climate change will ensure that we are better able to mitigate this existential threat. The vulnerability of OAS member states to climate change, in particular natural disasters, is evident in the growing severity of each disaster. The growing intensity and frequency of the disasters, as we have seen during this and previous hurricane seasons, where multiple storms occur concurrently, will mean that recovery time between disasters will be significantly reduced. The Commonwealth of Dominica, following the devastation caused by the passage of Hurricane Maria in 2017, has embarked on a costly but essential exercise to develop and implement a national resilient development strategy, which has since been transformed into a climate recovery plan, which will enable the Commonwealth of Dominica to realize its goal of becoming the first climate resilient nation in the world. But Mr. President, in order to achieve our goal, we require the support of all our partners. We reiterate our support as co-sponsors of the draft resolution advancing a hemispheric response to climate change in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic, presented by the Permanent Mission of Barbados and negotiated by member states. Mr. President, colleague ministers, the Latin America and the Caribbean region has suffered the hardest hit of the coronavirus pandemic, suffering the worst health and economic impact of this pandemic other than anywhere in the world. Our tourism industry has been severely affected with no or significantly low number of international visitors, increasing economic uncertainty, and the consequences of closure of borders and national state of emergencies and curfews that restrict movement of nationals and contain or eliminate community spread of the virus within our national borders. The Commonwealth of Dominica has implemented measures to ensure the safety and the health of our citizens and visitors to our shores. These measures, combined with the sacrifices of our healthcare and other frontline workers, as well as the support of all our people, have so far protected us from the health impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. The economic decline, climate change, the sudden onslaught and global uncertainty of the unparalleled and novel coronavirus have created unintended negative consequences to national economies, particularly in the health sector, tourism, and labor sectors. The closure of our borders, implementation of state of emergencies to legally create movement of nationals, which has resulted in the significantly contained community spread of the virus in the Commonwealth of Dominica. Closures of schools and non-essential businesses as preventative measures the rate infection of the coronavirus and protecting the health and well-being of our citizens has also resulted in the containment of the spread of the COVID-19 virus. However, the negative effects of these measures resulted in contraction in economic activity and unemployment. Our tourism industry, a major income earner, recorded a significant reduction of 70% decline in stable visitors. Mr. President, the Commonwealth of Dominica, at the time of writing, has recorded 21 cases of the coronavirus nationally. 7 cases remain active with 0 deaths. Dominica, like many of the CARICOM sister member states, has been successful in containing the spread of this virus. But we cannot become complacent due to the extreme uncertainty and elusiveness of this virus. The most recent advisory from the Director of PAHO, our very own Dr. Carissa Etienne, and our health authorities indicate that a second wave of the coronavirus in our region is imminent, if not already occurring. Therefore, Mr. President, COVID-19 has not only placed additional demands on our health and financial systems, but has further increased the indebtedness of member states. We have been forced to divert enormous allotment of our national budgets from vulnerable areas to cover the additional and unanticipated outlays of scarce resources to the health sector. In closing, Mr. President, development is one of the 4 pillars of the OAS, and as such has consistently received the smallest allocation in resources and rank. The core elements of sustainable development are rooted economic growth, social inclusion, environmental protection, as well as poverty reduction, each element interdependent on the other. The importance of the development area to member states, particularly the Caribbean, is well known and documented at the OAS. The development agenda at the OAS must be repurposed to correctly address the challenges faced by member states in the fight against the coronavirus. Mr. President, we commend and offer our continued support of the work done by the Inter-American Committee on Integral Development under the able stewardship of Mrs. Kim Osborne, Executive Secretary for Integral Development. I thank you, Mr. President. Muchas gracias.
I thank the distinguished Foreign Minister of Dominica, and I now give the floor to the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ecuador, His Excellency Luis Gallegos. Your Excellency.
President of the General Assembly, Ministers of Foreign Affairs, Secretary General, Assistant Secretary General, ladies and gentlemen. The American continent and the whole world is currently going through the most difficult times due to the COVID-19 pandemic. We have regretted the death of hundreds of thousands of people in the continent. The economies have been harshly hit, and despite all of this, the state of Ecuador has prioritized the protection and promotion of human rights, emphasizing the care of groups in greatest vulnerability. This global, unprecedented crisis is the first crisis encompassing the entire nations of the world, but also all human beings. It is the first time that we are all facing death, both ours and that of our loved ones. It has provided an opportunity for reflection, but more than anything else, it is an opportunity to take action. The Ecuadorian state believes that cooperation is fundamental to tackle the pandemic in a coordinated manner. COVID-19 vaccine should be a universal good so that all people without discrimination will be able to have access to it. Furthermore, we have asked the United Nations, and we have also asked the OAS with the other middle companies to look at the difficulties that middle-income countries are facing due to the pandemic so that they may be effective recipients of resources for development and cooperation with regards to the defense, strengthening and consolidation of democracy, first pillar of the OAS, our region still has a number of challenges to deal with, in particular the democratic, economic, social and humanitarian crisis. That is the unprecedented situation in Venezuela that has generated a diaspora with all the impacts and effects it causes. We condemn the Caracas action for reputable actions of harassment of political bodies and afflicting the populations. We're concerned by recent findings of the independent mission for determination of facts having to do with the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela that concluded that in Venezuela, crimes of less humanity had been committed. In order to guarantee human rights of Venezuelan citizens in Ecuador, we have promoted processes to regularize their existence in our country. This has helped 416,000 Venezuelans in Ecuador. Furthermore, 1,860,000 Venezuelan citizens have been naturalized and are in transit through Ecuador. The government of Ecuador has contributed millions in dollars, providing health and education to Venezuelan population with showing and displaying great solidarity. Ecuador has promoted regional dialogues through the Quito process to generate consensus amongst our countries in order to have safe, orderly, regular migration. The results of the dialogue have been encouraging and mutually beneficial for migrants and refugees, as well as for our governments and societies. Nonetheless, we must find long-term solutions so that democracy may be reinstated in Venezuela. On 14 January 2020, Ecuador became the fourth country to ratify the Inter-American Convention Against Racism, Racial Discrimination, and other forms of intolerance, proving that we are a country focused on human rights, and we remain committed to promote the principles of equality and non-discrimination in the Americas. Within the OAS, Ecuador has promoted the need to have a hemispheric diagnosis for the prevention, eradication, and sanction of all forms of abuse against children and adolescents, to establishing the Inter-American instrument that is binding for us all. Hopefully, member states will continue supporting the proposal. Likewise, Ecuador within the OAS has carried out actions to protect the elderly, people with disabilities, indigenous peoples, and to promote the right of women. It should be noted that gender equality globally is still a utopia, a debt in most countries. These gaps will increase probably due to the crisis engendered by the pandemic. That is why actions carried out by Ecuador for the empowerment of women is important. One example is to promote the economy and help rural women who are a pillar for the economic development of the country. Nonetheless, we are concerned, highly concerned about violence against women and children made worse under the pandemic, showing the true lack of respect towards women, gender, and children in the world. Ecuador, in the framework of its commitment to protect and guarantee human rights, believes it is essential for people whose human rights are affected by commercial activities should have means to access justice and reparations under standards of high quality. On 15 October of this year, the government of Ecuador committed to develop a national plan of action on human rights. We will consider the inter-American standards developed by the Rapporteur of Economic, Social, and Cultural and Environmental Rights of the OAS. This is in addition to a legally binding document by the United Nations. Ecuador invites the countries of the region to participate in this process that will take place in Geneva, October 26 through 30. Let me also refer to the need to strengthen the institutions of the Inter-American human rights system. Objectivity must prevail in all the organisms. They must comply with a mandate in accordance with the rules and policies. My country invited the organization to meet in Ecuador for its between 8 and 14 November 2019, showing the closeness between the organization and its citizen. In Ecuador, we have been efficiently cooperating. The 7th meeting of Ministers of Security of the Americas, MISPA, took place in Quito, October 30-31, 2019, deciding on the creation of hemispheric security to combat transnational organized crime and a companion of hemispheric mechanisms for coordination, sharing information and intelligence between the ministries of security and police forces in our countries to be used by the OAS member states, and a second training course for the Inter-American Network for Development of Police that took place, brought together 60 professionals from police institutions of 26 countries in the hemisphere. Ecuador confirms it will continue cooperating with the organization.
The plight of middle-income countries serves to join efforts with our brothers and sisters nations of the Caribbean in our common endeavor to have our situation acknowledged by donors and international financial institutions. It also invites us to reflect upon the relationship among other member states of the organization. Indeed, the basis of the common denominator we should consolidate the OAS as a forum where we speak, we hear, and we get to better know each other beyond the circumstantial political differences, as the OAS is currently one of the few venues where we benefit from this treasured opportunity. Señor Presidente,
Mr. President, Ecuador firmly believes that the role of the OAS is fundamental to combat the pandemic and to address the economic and social crises. I appeal to the strengthening of multilateralism in the region with cooperation and hemispheric solidarity, and to commit efforts to address a situation that has overcome the individual capabilities of member states to achieve our objectives and the building of more fair, resilient, inclusive societies without leaving anyone behind. We are convinced this can only occur in a democratic environment. Let me conclude by congratulating Bolivia for the elections that took place this weekend and wish the very best of successes to the government. Ladies and gentlemen, we are facing a challenge, a historic challenge to humanity. Let us all recall that this General Assembly takes place at the negative time of the pandemic that has brought to their knees the democracies of the world. We must together face this challenge. History will judge us based on decisions made today, showing that we are capable of doing things instead of confronting one another with disputes that right now are totally unnecessary. Thank you very much.
I thank the distinguished Foreign Minister of Ecuador. And now I give the floor to the Foreign Minister of El Salvador, Her Excellency Alexandra Hill. Her Excellency, you have.
Señor Presidente de la 50ª.
Thank you very much, Chair of this 50th General Assembly, Ministers, Vice Ministers of Foreign Affairs, Honorable Secretary General Luis Almagro, Assistant Secretary General Nestor Mendez, heads of delegations, ambassadors, permanent representatives, and alternate representatives. Mr. Chair, let me first express the satisfaction of our delegation in seeing you preside over this session. Please note that you have the full support of El Salvador in seeking consensus in this space at this very august opportunity. It has been a year now since my first participation in the General Assembly as at the head of our Ministry of Foreign Affairs. At that time, we could never imagine that our second meeting would be under the present circumstances, in that our lifestyles have been so hard hit, as have been structures around the world. The interpreter notes that the sound quality at origin is extremely defective, and waiting, the interpreter will do her best. I would like to first recognize the work of the anonymous heroes in healthcare who on the front lines have saved lives in each and every corner of our region. When we took power in this administration last year, we sought to ensure the well-being of all Salvadorans. This has not, of course, been an easy task, particularly when we are grappling simultaneously with natural disasters and the health crisis in the context of a highly adverse political situation and a political class that refuses to allow for change on behalf of the people, and that continue to fight for the status quo that has been in place for the last 30 years. The COVID-19 crisis has brought to a standstill many of our plans and policy, and to divert resources to other tasks. We have taken difficult measures, such as closing our borders, our commerce, confining our people to their homes. The president was forced to contain a human tsunami of precarious healthcare inherited over the course of decades, in which the lack of human capabilities and the lack of institutional abilities to deal with even the most minimum of health crises. Needless to speak, we had no capability of grappling with this level of a pandemic. The pandemic, of course, has brought to the forefront the major inequalities and issues that have permeated our region for decades, and that have aggravated the miserable conditions of our population, particularly women and children at the greatest risk. Therefore, it is particularly timely for us to come together today to endeavor to revert these unprecedented conditions and to redouble our efforts in identifying multilateral responses and be particularly effective in our efforts to overcome this crisis. Multilateralism is undoubtedly the best path to overcoming our challenges. We must take action. Human suffering continues to grow, and I continue to dream that we will be able to make decisions and find solutions to the voids and the shortcomings in our own organization. This is a turning point, a moment of inflection for the OAS. We must ensure respect for human rights, ensure the security and safety of each and every citizen of our region, and provide opportunities so that we can ensure the comprehensive development of our peoples. We must look to each other and to ourselves, and in that context, the OAS, as the preeminent political forum in the region, must leave aside individual interests and focus on the problems and the interests that affect all of us. And Mr. Chair, until the COVID-19 crisis, security and crime were the major issues in my nation, leading to deaths and thousands of victims. Today, thanks to President Bukele's action, we have had the safest months since the peace accords were signed, and we have seen 9 people a day, 9 parents, 9 children, nonetheless, who have lost their lives. They are bricklayers, they are teachers, they are a family, they contribute to our society, and yet they still are passing away. This is very different from their circumstances a year and a half ago. We would be happy to discuss our efforts and our success in combating crime when we hopefully host MISPA 8 in San Salvador in 2021, and we extend to that event a very cordial invitation, and we look forward to receiving your highest officials at that. We continue to forge forward on our path to making El Salvador as safe as country as possible, to attract tourism and to propagate that safety and security across the region. We will continue to combat another pandemic, and that is that of corruption. Thanks to the commitment of President Bukele and the decisive support of the Secretary General of the OAS, and particularly the person of Luis Almagro, the Anti-Corruption Committee in El Salvador started its work this year independently, transparently, and with autonomy to analyze the institutions in my country in an effort to combat the scourge. We again, Mr. Secretary General, thank you and your team for the decisive support in ensuring that this committee could come to fruition, and we look forward to your further collaboration in its work. Nonetheless, the current situation is challenging to say the least. The growing inequality as a result of the current health crisis, particularly that of the most vulnerable, is a particular concern. Women not only are the most vulnerable, they are also at the forefront of our front lines, and at the same time are at the forefront of our households. We therefore are looking to broad, differentiated policy to help to ensure the eradication also of all forms of violence against women, girls, and adolescents, very often that are generated as a result of traditions of patriarchy that should be eradicated from our modern society. Today, El Salvador today has a cabinet that has gender parity, and we are encouraging the participation of women as broadly as possible. It is not possible to generate policies for women if only men are in power. Now, I don't mean by that that men are not needed in policy making. They certainly are. But the solutions to the crises that we are confronting undoubtedly require women in decision-making positions, in policy making at the national, regional, and sub-regional levels. We need more women across the board because we are not the weaker sex. The government has further sought to adopt measures to support our people across the breadth and width of the country through new policies for social support that we are proud to support through the work, particularly of our First Lady. We have sought to occupy positions such as the pro tempore chair of organizations that seek to grapple with the extremely difficult situation of refugees and displaced people across the region as a result of the pandemic, as well as the committees within the OAS that are addressing the issues of people with disabilities. We further seek to consolidate in our country's democratic values. In this regard, we must highlight the human tragedy that our brothers and sisters in Venezuela are experiencing. In the midst of this pandemic, they continue to be held hostage by a regime that continues to violate the most basic of their rights. El Salvador reiterates that it condemns in the most strenuous terms the Maduro regime and its efforts to do away with all spaces of democratic expressions and its rejection of the illegal elections that the regime purports to hold that lack even the most minimum standards that are required for fair and free elections. And El Salvador calls for free and fair elections to be held in their stead. We encourage the compliance with the important documents and standards of our region, including the Democratic Charter, in terms of our efforts also to reach agreement and to use negotiation. Again, from the interpreter, the sound at origin is particularly challenging. We are doing our best, but it is impossible to render every word that is being stated by the speaker. We have as a neighbor El Salvador. President Bukele reiterates his commitment to undertaking all efforts necessary to establish a good faith dialogue to reach substantive accords that will allow our sister country, a country that is beloved by El Salvador, to once and for all reach the peace that all of its beloved people deserve and merit. Let me congratulate also on this occasion the people of Bolivia for their successful electoral processes on Sunday and express our hope that through these elections, the people of Bolivia will continue to strengthen their institutions and continue down the path of development. Mr. Chair, we would like to recognize the support of our OAS at the time of greatest need, particularly in walking hand in hand with us for the cooperation, for the solidarity that the OAS has shown during this crisis and through the emergency funds that have been made available as a result of the storms that we have suffered earlier this year in the midst of our COVID-19 crisis. We also thank you for the technical assistance received in the areas of tourism, education, environment, and other fields. Let me conclude by underscoring that we cannot allow this pandemic to pose an irrecoverable setback to our efforts. It is a priority for this administration to redouble our efforts and to secure our development goals. Our president and our people demand that of us. That is why we are making an enormous effort in public health and in our economic and social policies to provide support and to be in a position to provide additional support to our people. As we know, solidarity and cooperation and the growing support among member states and permanent observers and all the members of the Inter-American system are key, and it is the only way in which we will prevail. The OAS is the best forum for us to present new strategies and exchange experiences. Lastly, El Salvador reiterates its firm commitment to multilateralism and the inter-American principles that inspire our organization and each of its 4 pillars. Thank you very much to all. God bless the Organization of American States and everyone present today. Thank you.
Thank the Foreign Minister of El Salvador for a very fulsome statement. I think she set a record for the speeches made here today. And I want to just remind people that we've got 15 or 16 more speakers left on the list. And it really would be helpful, even if you cannot keep to the 6 minutes that we had all agreed to at the beginning of this meeting. We try at least not to exceed 10 minutes. And I urge others, please, who follow, to try to do that in the interest of everyone else. Everybody would like to be heard at this General Assembly. And now the next speaker is a recording from His Excellency, the Secretary of State of the United States, Mr. Michael Pompeo.
Thank you, Secretary Mulgrew, Luis, for your outstanding leadership of this organization. Last January, I praised the OAS as an example of multilateral organization that actually works. It works because we share democratic values. And under your leadership, the OAS isn't afraid to stand up for these values. Good on you. It's fitting. It's fitting that you're guiding the organization as we celebrate this 50th General Assembly. Thank you. Thank you, too, to Minister Henfield for chairing this gathering. The U.S. has always valued the Bahamas as a neighbor, partner, and friend. I'm deeply sorry we couldn't gather in your beautiful country in person for this momentous meeting. 2020 has been a tough year, but the OAS has done outstanding work. I was fortunate to be in Guyana just last month to congratulate President Ali on winning a free and fair election. And I know the OAS's support was crucial in upholding democracy for the Guyanese people. In Nicaragua, the U.S. applauds the OAS for confronting President Ortega's authoritarian regime. We all know there's more work to do to uphold our hemisphere as a hemisphere of freedom. Nicolas Maduro's plan to hold fraudulent elections in December, to steal the National Assembly, Venezuela's last democratic institution, is only the latest abuse of power. Maduro has also used the COVID-19 pandemic to commit massive human rights violations and increase his control of the Venezuelan people. The United States expects this body to approve a strong resolution condemning the Maduro regime this year, just as we expect all member states not to recognize Venezuela's illegitimate elections, past or future. As I just mentioned, President Ortega also undermines democracy in his country. He violates the Nicaraguan people's most basic rights to express themselves and assemble peacefully, even enabling violent attacks on churches. We expect the OAS General Assembly to approve a resolution condemning the Ortega government's failure to meet democratic standards. This is basic. The resolution must also demand respect for human rights and outline specific electoral reforms required for a free and fair election in Nicaragua. Finally, we urge the OAS to take stronger action on Cuba. Havana is a menace to democracy throughout the entire hemisphere, whether by propping up the Maduro regime, facilitating human trafficking by forcing its doctors to work abroad, taking their money, or advocating for regressive economic policies. Friends, as we celebrate 50 years, 5 decades of defending democracy, let's make it our mission to solidify our reputation as a hemisphere of freedom. Let's hold true to our noble charter and continue effective multilateral collaboration. Thank you, and may God bless the Americas.
Well, I thank the distinguished Secretary of State of the United States of America for packing a big punch in a very short period of time. And now I turn the floor over to the distinguished representative of Grenada, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, His Excellency, Mr. Peter David. Minister David, you have the floor, sir.
Thank you very much. This is Minister Oliver Joseph, the new Minister of Foreign Affairs. I assumed office on the 5th of October, so just a few days, replacing Minister David. So thank you very much, Mr. President. My first address to the OAS General Assembly. I want to extend best wishes to all the members of the OAS, the Secretary General, Assistant Secretary General, esteemed colleague foreign ministers, heads of delegation, permanent observers, chair of the Permanent Council, representatives of international organizations, representative of civil society. Permit me to extend my country's solidarity with the nations and peoples of the Americas during these most uncertain times. Our sympathies are extended to the delegations and those viewing this webcast who have lost loved ones or caring for family members affected by the coronavirus. My delegation joins others who have spoken before me in congratulating you, Mr. Darren Hansfield, on your assumption to the presidency of the General Assembly. Our deliberations are in good hands. I wish to also congratulate Secretary General and Assistant Secretary General for the re-election to a new term. Mr. President, as we focus on the theme selected for this General Assembly, which was obstructed by the onset of COVID-19 pandemic, we are mindful that we cannot confine our discussions within the context of a health crisis. We must also address the economic, social, developmental, political, and security implications. We have witnessed tremendous loss of lives and livelihoods across the hemisphere, and in fact, the world over. The fallouts of this pandemic will leave the region reeling for some time to come, since no one was prepared for this pandemic. Even diversified economies are suffering. Mr. President, imagine our small open economy, heavily dependent on tourism and international trade, having to lock down our country. As a small vulnerable state, Grenada experienced 5 years of economic growth, averaging 3.1%, attained through sacrifice and prudent fiscal management. According to the updated IMF forecast on the 14th of April 2020, it states, and I quote, due to the outbreak of COVID-19, Grenada's GDP growth is expected to slow down to -8% and pick up to 6.1% in 2021. We experienced revenue collection decline of almost 50%, while at the same time having to provide stimulus package for our affected industries, impacted sectors, and vulnerable population, coupled with increased expenditure to mitigate the impact of the disease. As we are all too aware, Mr. President, this pandemic has brought to light many of the imbalances that exist to the detriment of small states. The deck is stacked against us as we attempt to access credit and concessionary financing. The reclassification of countries as middle income has added to our distress. Countries like mine have had to borrow under unfavorable terms and conditions. Needless to say, Mr. President, that there is a desirability for regional and international cooperation initiatives. We must identify the opportunities provided by this crisis as we move forward to assist the people in our hemisphere. Mr. President, my delegation is grateful that the General Secretariat of the OAS is collaborating with regional and international bodies within the context of the framework strategy document From Vulnerability to Resilience. In fact, it is a point of discussion at the annual meetings of the World Bank Group currently taking place. Mr. President, it is safe to say that COVID-19 has also reinforced the importance of multilateralism. The small nations of the Caribbean, and in particular my own country, are beholden to the Pan-American Health Organization, the World Health Organization, for ensuring that we had access to testing supplies, contact tracing, and for reinforcing our health sector. Not only did PAHO provide technical support, testing equipment, material resources, and clinical responses to our health sector, but also manpower and equipment for surveillance guidance and protocols. Grenada takes this opportunity to express profound gratitude to PAHO and looks forward to maintaining future collaboration as we continue to grapple with COVID-19. Mr. President, based on our vulnerabilities, this crisis will have damaging effects on employment and our fight against poverty and inequality, and in some cases, create a downward spiral of insecurity and threats to human rights and democracy. For the Caribbean, Mr. President, there are critical development and security implications associated with COVID-19. This means that as an organization, the OAS must set an agenda for advancing regional security priorities in the COVID-19 and post-COVID-19 environment. We can highlight border security, climate change and environmental resilience, cybersecurity and cybercrime, and economic resilience as areas deserving our focus. Some of these themes emanated from the Committee on Hemispheric Security, meeting on special security concerns of the small island and low-lying coastal developing states of the Caribbean, held on June 25, 2020. Mr. President, we are still in the hurricane season, as you are very much aware. Imagine an active season in the middle of a pandemic. The effects of climate change are realities and lived experiences for the small island, low-lying coastal developing states of the Caribbean. That is why, Mr. President, my delegation co-sponsored the resolution on advancing the hemispheric response to climate change in the context of COVID-19 pandemic, and supports the resolution advancing hemispheric security, a multi-dimensional approach. These two issues remain of phenomenal relevance to the survival of our small, vulnerable states and the maintenance of peace and democracy within the wider hemisphere. I cannot begin to underscore the need for a multilateral approach. Mr. President, I wish to refer to the budget of the OAS. Like our national budgets, the organization budget has become pressurized. However, my delegation cautioned against indiscriminate cuts. Each pillar should enjoy the same level of importance with equality in distribution and allocation of funds. Mr. President, my delegation is alarmed by the not so quiet whispers about delegating and outsourcing the fundamental political directives of integral development to the regional banks and IFIs, or that integral development is a Caribbean issue. Mr. President, let us dispel any ideas of defunding integral development. Integral development is an inextricable link to peace and security. And since it encompasses the economic, social, educational, scientific, and technological fields, it will deliver shared prosperity to all the citizens of the Americas. Mr. President, the consequences of the pandemic and the threats to our citizens and economies are still to be fully assessed and understood. My delegation hopes that as we deliberate over these 2 days, we acknowledge that our recovery and long-term development responses are hinged on the collective responses from individual member states. We need to bring hope to the people of our area. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister Joseph. May I apologize to you, sir, for not catching up with the fact that Minister David had moved on to another ministry. Let me also congratulate you on your first outing on the OAS wicket. You batted a good century. Thanks very much. And now I give the floor to the distinguished Foreign Minister of Guatemala, His Excellency Pedro Rola Vila.
It is an honor to participate as the first time as Minister for Foreign Affairs of Guatemala at the 50th regular session of the General Assembly of the Organization of American States. On behalf of the President of the Republic of Guatemala, Dr. Alejandro Yamatei in my own name, I greet you all. Our region is today one of the epicenters of the COVID-19 pandemic and facing a high cost due to the loss of human life from an unprecedented health crisis. At the same time, we need to be prepared for the needed economic recovery. We are grateful to the Assembly to focus on addressing the challenges of COVID-19 in the hemisphere with a collaborative approach to address vulnerabilities and build resilience in times of crisis based on the OAS 4 pillars. Ladies and gentlemen, from the beginning of the pandemic, the government of Guatemala adopted urgent decisions in order to serve the population, protecting life, assuring the necessary conditions to protect health and well-being for all Guatemalans, preserving the country's economy. We are convinced that multilateral cooperation to strengthen public health systems should be the priority. We hope to continue working hand in hand with the OAS and PAHO on initiatives that focus on that goal. We are grateful to other countries, organizations, and entities of the Inter-American system for their support. We underscore the importance of having an effective vaccine with equitable and immediate access for all countries. We appreciate the COVAX initiative, which we have joined, plus others that are taking place in parallel in order to have vaccines for the people of Guatemala. Thus, we are willing to be a distribution center for Central America. We are in a process in which we are reopening the economy. We have an economic recovery plan focusing on generating new jobs, attract strategic investment to the country, and encourage the consumption of Guatemalan goods and services. We encourage that everyone works in developing health protocols to reactivate tourism, plus protocols for resilience for MSMEs, plus renegotiate the Inter-American Entrepreneurial Charter to reactivate economic reinitiation in the Americas. Mr. President, my country wants to refer to topics of great importance for our hemisphere. Combating food insecurity is one of the priorities of the President of Guatemala, and therefore launched the strategy, the Major Crusade for Nutrition. And thus we presented a draft resolution called The Challenges for Food and Nutritional Security in the Americas given the COVID-19 pandemic in the framework of the Plan of Action Guatemala 2019 for the consideration and adoption by this General Assembly. We thank the 18 countries that have co-sponsored this resolution and the Secretariat for Access to Rights and Equity for its committed effort to this endeavor. As for migration, Guatemala, given its geographic location, is a country of origin, transit, destination, and return of migrants. We reiterate our commitment for respect of human rights, and in the context of the pandemic, we believe it's necessary to redouble efforts to provide care to the most vulnerable. The contributions are vital for the development of communities. In relation to human rights, Guatemala has started a process to reform the institutions that are responsible for the promotion and respect for human rights, including creation of the Presidential Committee for Peace and Human Rights. Guatemala urges efforts continue to reinforce the inter-American system for the promotion and protection of human rights in the hemisphere, and we commit to playing our part in this process. In the framework of the promotion and defense of democracy, we hope that re-establishment of democracy in Venezuela becomes reality. We reiterate that the only path is through parliamentary and presidential elections that are free, fair, and believable. When it comes to transparency, Guatemala has a Presidential Commission Against Corruption and a Presidential Commission on Open and Electronic Government. We urge the OAS to work on modern tools such as e-government, promoting the use of new technologies, information and communication technologies for the modern public administration. Turning to regional security, it's important to adapt and strengthen institutional capabilities in response to the new threats such as cybercrime. Guatemala reaffirms its commitment to design and implement hemispheric strategies to prevent and combat transnational organized crime. Ladies and gentlemen, Guatemala today reiterates its confidence in the Organization of American States. We believe it is fundamental to strengthen the organization. We must continue working under the leadership of Secretary General Luis Almagro to promote the OAS agenda in the 4 fundamental pillars. Given the important task carried out by the OAS in the hemisphere, Guatemala is honored to present to all members its interest in hosting the 51st regular session of the General Assembly in 2021. As of now, Guatemala looks forward to welcoming you.
Thanks very much to the distinguished Foreign Minister of Guatemala. In terms of the 3 Gs of the OAS, Grenada, Guatemala, and Guyana, we have a trio of new foreign ministers. We've already met the foreign ministers of Foreign Minister Oliver Joseph, Foreign Minister Pedro Bura Villa, and now we are to meet the third and of the 3 new foreign ministers representing the Gs in the US, the Foreign Minister of Guyana, His Excellency Hugh Tom. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Chair Sir Saunders. I had the pleasure of meeting you in Georgetown, Guyana several years ago, many years ago, at the Oasis Cafe. You may not have remembered, but I did an interview with you on UNISUR. So it's a pleasure to meet you in a different capacity. I know you're a long-standing diplomat, and now you're Foreign Minister again, and a member of the OAS. So it's a pleasure meeting you this evening, Mr. Chair. Esteemed colleague ministers of foreign affairs, heads of delegation, Mr. Secretary General, Mr. Assistant Secretary General, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, good evening from Georgetown, Guyana. First, please allow me to bid you greetings on behalf of our newly elected President, His Excellency Dr. Mohammed Irfan Ali, and the people of Guyana. First of all, Mr. Chair, I'd like to commend the Assistant Secretary General Mendez and his team for the excellent technical arrangements made to ensure the success of this unprecedented virtual General Assembly. I'm pleased to meet, albeit virtually, my colleague foreign ministers and other heads of delegation. For the first time since being appointed foreign minister, and I look forward to many more fruitful engagements in the future. Mr. Chair, the COVID-19 pandemic continues to have a most negative impact on development of our countries, overturning the gains made towards attaining the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals, while disrupting economic growth and increasing poverty and inequality. And any further delay in bringing this pandemic under control and alleviating the extreme economic distress our countries are experiencing will result in a deepened crisis involving an increased debt burden. Also, a worsening unemployment situation and continued challenges to the provision of education to our children and young people, as well as a weakening of our ability to deliver adequate health care, among other essential services. It is therefore imperative that an organization like the OAS help to find lasting solutions to existing hurdles that have impeded and continue to impede our progress towards a progressive and sustainable development trajectory. And even as we endeavor to ensure that all four pillars of the OAS remain on equal footing. Mr. Chairman, Guyana, like many other countries of the hemisphere, is committed to upholding the principles of democracy and the rule of law. It is in this regard that I extend on behalf of the government and people of Guyana to Secretary General Luis Almagro and officials of the General Secretariat, in particular, the Department of Electoral Cooperation and Observation, as well as the member states of the organization. Sincere gratitude for the support provided during the recent electoral crisis, which culminated with the will of the Guyanese people being respected and democracy and rule of law triumphing after 5 tense long months. We especially wish to express our appreciation for the role played by the Chief of the Electoral Observation Mission, former Prime Minister of Jamaica, the Most Honorable Bruce Golding, and the members of the Commission for their unwavering dedication throughout the protracted process. Mr. Chairman, it should come as no surprise to anyone that Guyana is very concerned about the increasing challenges to democracy in the hemisphere and around the world. Many of these exacerbated by the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic. As a consequence of the pandemic, more than 67 countries and territories have had elections postponed, and more than 80 countries have declared a state of emergency, with a consequent deterioration in the quality of democracy and respect for human rights in most of those countries. On the other hand, during this period, 11 countries have become democracies. I therefore posit that a collective vigilance and mutual support, and with the right amount of political will and citizen participation, democracy can prevail. We must therefore monitor ourselves daily for any regression from upholding the principles of democracy and human rights, as we must be careful, moreover, not to allow the fragilities and vulnerabilities of our countries particularly our small developing countries, to be completely undermined by this pandemic. Mr. Chairman, Ghana, like so many other countries, has refocused its priorities to deal with the health crisis affecting our people and the dire economic impact on our people's livelihoods. None of us in a position to conduct business as usual. If the popular phrase, "we are all in this together," is to have any real meaning, then we must all come together, large and small, industrialized or developing economies, to pursue collective solutions to one of the greatest existential threats of the 21st century. Guyana sees the OAS as strategically positioned in Washington, D.C., right next to the world's leading international financial institutions and the Inter-American Development Bank. And we therefore urge the OAS not just to carry on with its relatively small development programs and valuable scholarship opportunities, but also to do its utmost to address the problems that we face as small developing countries. In this respect, my delegation fully supports the framework strategy document, From Vulnerability to Resilience, and its accompanying actions, a collaborative effort between the Secretary General and the CARICOM Caucus of Ambassadors, as a roadmap that will see the Secretary General playing the role of key interlocutor and advocate to our countries. To our country's behalf, with the international financial institutions in Washington, D.C., and other development partners. I thank the Secretary General most sincerely for agreeing to champion our interests during this period of grave uncertainty. And I urge member states, especially those with greater resources and those who sit on the high councils of the developed world, to recognize our needs and support more humane and realistic plans, not only to help us recover from the onslaught of the pandemic, but also to build resilience and sustainability in the face of other previous challenges and exogenous shocks, such as climate change, environmental degradation, and natural disasters. Mr. Chairman, climate change continues to be one of the greatest existential threats to Guyana and countries within this hemisphere. I am therefore pleased to note that the resolution, spearheaded by the delegation of Barbados and co-sponsored by all 14 CARICOM countries at the OAS and 9 other member states, advancing under the theme "Advancing the Hemispheric Response to Climate Change," is in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic, will be adopted at the end of our deliberations. Mr. Chairman, our hemisphere is also faced with challenges. In the context of the multidimensional nature of security, given that transnational organized crime, corruption, narco-trafficking, cyber attacks, terrorism, and violent crime continue to impair our capacity to ensure that our societies are free from these scourges. My delegation is mindful of the fundamental differences which may exist in our acceptance of the interrelated nature of these challenges, but nevertheless calls on the entire membership of the OAS to acknowledge and collaborate, and to acknowledge that a collaborative and cohesive approach in the meeting of these challenges will provide the greatest benefits for all. Mr. Chairman, Ghana has had the distinct honor and privilege of chairing simultaneously the Permanent Council from January 1st to March 31st, and the Inter-American Council for Integral Development from January 1st to June 30th. We not only oversaw the process to elect the Secretary General and the Assistant Secretary General, but also had the contend with the challenges presented by the 5 months of the coronavirus pandemic. I would also like to thank all member states for their tremendous support during our twin chairmanships and Ambassador Riyad Insanali for his effective and excellent leadership in steering these bodies successfully at a particularly challenging time for us all. Guyana intends to continue to play its part as a responsible member of the hemispheric community in helping to advance a coherent hemispheric agenda based on the 4 pillars of the OAS. Even in the midst of the current crisis, Guyana anticipates exponential growth in the next 5 years as a result of the benefits that are expected to be derived from our oil and gas sector, the proceeds of which will be used responsibly for the benefit of all Guyanese. In this respect, I take this opportunity to ensure all regional partners that Guyana will play its role to support energy security in the Caribbean and contribute to further development of the energy and climate partnership of the Americas. I also wish to give the assurance that Guyana's election by acclamation to serve as Vice Chair of the Inter-American Committee Against Terrorism at its 20th regular session held on September 25th last will provide another opportunity for us to contribute towards ensuring that the hemisphere's security agenda is further strengthened. Mr. Chairman, while we remain hopeful that we will overcome this pandemic, though we know not when, there is also need for efforts towards reducing global and societal inequalities, which have become more pronounced with the advent of this virus. As we look forward, we hope towards the dawning of a brighter future. Efforts should be geared towards anticipating and preventing future outbreaks, while providing quality health care, housing, potable water, and access to education for all. Mr. Chairman, the OAS remains the principal forum for political dialogue in this hemisphere. This rules-based institution must pursue consensus building, especially on the pressing issues that continue to confront us. Bearing in mind the principles enshrined in our charter, we must set aside the notion that there are separate rules for some and another set for others, and recognize that whatever the prevailing circumstances, now or in the future, this body must be ever mindful that the charter must be applied equally across the board. In this respect, Guyana continues to value multilateralism and the role played by the OAS. We remain committed to ensuring that the 4 pillars of the OAS, democracy and good governance, the promotion and protection of human rights, the pursuit of integral, sustainable, and equitable development, the multidimensional security needs of countries are addressed and bear equal treatment if we are to confront the challenges of the present and the future. I thank you.
Thank the distinguished Foreign Minister of Guyana. And I just want to quickly draw your attention to the fact that we've got roughly 35 minutes left before the end of the session. And I think we will have to make collectively a decision on whether we will extend any longer tonight beyond 7, given that we've got a very long schedule tomorrow and one which is likely to be controversial in some places. I will consult with the Secretariat on that after we hear the next speaker, who will be the distinguished Foreign Minister of Haiti, His Excellency Claude Joseph. Your Excellency, you have the floor. Do we have the Foreign Minister of Haiti with us?
Can you hear me? Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. Official language. Excellence, Monsieur le Président.
Excellency, Mr. President, Mr. Secretary General of the Organization of American States, heads of delegations, distinguished delegates, ministers, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to participate in this 50th regular General Assembly of the Organization of American States, which has taken place during a very difficult time due to COVID-19. I would like to congratulate the President of our General Assembly for his creativity and his dynamism. We also would like to express gratitude to the technical staff for the wonderful organization of this virtual conference. This incredible adaptation skills to these difficulties is admirable. The pandemic, COVID-19, has led to economic damage and loss of life, especially in our continent. I would like to avail myself of this occasion to offer condolences to all of those who have lost loved ones who have been brutally ripped from our lives. Due to the pandemic, many countries have had to take drastic measures which are not very popular, lockdowns, budget cuts, and others to protect their population and also to ensure socioeconomic stability. Mr. President, Mr. Secretary General, ladies and gentlemen, the 50th regular General Assembly is focused on the best way to address the challenges of COVID-19. And we all agree that this unprecedented health crisis cannot be solved with isolated actions. We must be united, and we need to take joint and coordinated actions to overcome this crisis. This must be done at a regional and worldwide level. Our organization has, since its creation, done this based on principles and values like cooperation. The slogan, more rights for more people, corresponds very well to what we do. And so the 4 pillars of the organization, the democracy, security, development, and human rights, bring us together to fight COVID-19 and to address its serious consequences, but it will allow us to define and address the priorities we have, such as sustainable development. We need to maintain what we have achieved in recent years, and we need to think about our people's future. Furthermore, our organization, has the duty to support access to education for member states so that our youth have a promising and clear future, so that they can have a life plan. We need to invest in them, and we need to fight against inequalities that exist. In that regard, my delegation proposes that we create mechanisms that will allow us to work together based on mutual understanding and trust and respect, so that we can fight against inequalities and to go forward together. We need to be able to implement good practices with regard to education. It is fundamental we have this kind of good practices. In the 21st century, we need to base our education on virtual methods. And so the pandemic has shown us that there is this digital gap that exists, especially with regard to education, and we need to do something about that. Mr. President, security is also one of our priorities. A good security system will allow us to fight criminality that is a scourge in our region and for our societies. Killings continue. During the special conference on security that took place in Mexico, the member states of the OAS adopted the Declaration on Security in the Americas. It emphasized natural disasters and also I apologize, says the speaker. And it urged us to fight against this. Some countries see the different crises that are striking us, man-made ones, natural disasters, health disasters like COVID-19. We need to be prudent in our actions, but we need to unite our efforts and be proactive so that we can try to have economic recovery and also social protection and access to health services. Our fourth priority has to do with development. We must change our paradigm. We must have a new economic development model for the region. The progress of our societies means that we must have an in-depth assessment of the mechanisms that we use for this. The current model has not had the same impact in all countries. For some countries, it's been fine, but other countries are not able to really take off. The role of our prestigious regional organization is crucial. The weakest countries need the OAS to access financial assistance and to access the Inter-American Development Agency and other regional funds. Countries should be treated equally, especially with regard to the criteria for eligibility for financing under positive conditions. We live in the most unequal region in the world. We must change this for future generations. We must be ready to do something. We must get rid of these inequalities. We must do this within countries and within our region. We need to look at those who are most marginalized. We need to change methods. Mr. President, it is clear that Latin America and the Caribbean are one of the regions that are most exposed to natural disasters. And we see this through the statistics of the last 10 years. We have hundreds of thousands who were victims of natural disasters of all kinds. Floods, tropical storms, earthquakes, drought, extreme temperatures, mudslides, volcano explosions. We must build resilience of our people and our countries to address these natural disasters. This is imperative. Climate change, global warming means that these catastrophes are increasing and are more intense. And so we must show solidarity. We are all affected by climate change. We see this around us. And so we must allow our young people to have a future by making our region more resilient. We need to have strategies to be able to fight this. This should be based on experiences from the past and lessons learned. So we have a culture of resilience that is forward-looking. Food security is another priority we have. The problem of nutritional and food insecurity has been exacerbated by the COVID-19 health crisis. We are aware of this at a worldwide level. We know the importance of food and nutritional security, but the inequalities that exist in this regard persist. We need concrete long-term and medium-term actions to be able to address this. We have millions of people who are on the brink of hunger. Our organization must commit to contribute to help governments to take ideal measures to ensure the food security in the long term, having good agricultural policies and also rural development policies. Mr. President, Mr. Secretary General, ladies and gentlemen, our last priority is to strengthen human rights and democracy. The restoration of democracy and the rule of law, the promotion and protection of human rights, these are the heart of my administration or the administration I work for. So I am honored to work for this administration. So the Haitian people want changes. And this is based on democracy and the rule of law. The Republic of Haiti supports the values of human rights and democracy. That's why it actively participates in all initiatives and activities in this regard. And that is why it is very concerned about the situation in some countries of the region where human rights are violated and democratic principles are not respected. The government of our republic is aware of the socioeconomic conditions in Haiti currently characterized by a dysfunctional government in all its branches, i.e. the legislative branch, especially with regard to the Senate. This has been the case since January. That is why our President Jovenel Moïse is trying to normalize the situation, and he is trying to create conditions so that there can be elections at every level in order to have institutions that work. The systematization of the fight against corruption and the macroeconomic management to be able to prop up our national currency, and the strengthening and professionalization of national police, the improvement of the justice system, and also the fight against crime. We thank our international partners who have been there to support us in these difficult times and with these difficult tasks. And we will continue to do everything possible to bring about stability and progress in Haiti. Mr. President, I'd like to conclude my remarks by saying that the resolutions adopted here during this General Assembly will help us to take interventions and actions that will be positive in order to better the life of our people. I thank you very much.
Thank you very much, the Foreign Minister of Haiti. Just to tell you that the Secretariat with whom I've consulted has decided that we will end at 7 this evening. That doesn't leave us very much time for other speakers this evening, but I will not waste any more time. I will call now on the leader of the delegation of Honduras, the Secretary of State, His Excellency Lisandro Rosales. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and Secretary General. Thank you to all our colleagues and Foreign Affairs secretaries that have been here. We live in a very difficult time. The pandemic of COVID-19 showed the difficulties and the problems in our structures. There was a very strong fight to accept the demands. The urgency and the need of survival forces us to take in an efficient way the economic and financial way. And this is very good and a burden for every single country. We have to recover the small and medium-sized enterprise, and because they are the force for the wealth and richness in our country. And if we do not do so, we could have an institutional crisis that would stop our development. We have to remember the healthcare systems in many of our countries that we know we have to strengthen in the measure as much as possible with the economic possibilities we had. But nevertheless, we need to go with a better infrastructure and better healthcare services. The response to COVID-19 recognizes this gap. We have to be aware, admit it, and take the necessary measures, supplementary ones, both multilateral as national. Let us recall that the only times in our lives when we really grow and change as human beings, and when we have the result, we go from the darkness to other moments when we consider them as an opportunity. And our response has to be dynamic, both to administer crisis as well as to solve the structural problems that have left us vulnerable. We are getting ready for the future. We need a growth, and we have to progress in our social development. In the heart of the OAS, many initiatives have started, and all of them very important, as well as the nutritional, the housing, and the different programs, as well as contagious Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador. Just the same, we have also dealt with all the delegations, the problems of the migrants and their families. There were the 4 pillars of the OAS, the human rights, security, and development as a driving force to guide our actions. But in the long term, we need other type of deployment in a creative way in order to reach our needs. Without forgetting the pandemic caused by COVID-19, we have to strengthen the economic position of the member states with more solidarity, with more productivity, and more proximity. So ECLAC could become or create a group that have integrationalist problems in order to do the supplementary agenda. PAHO could be a leader in research, investigation, and administration of the healthcare systems. The Ibero-American Secretariat could make a promotion in healthcare as guidelines and models that would complement the needs and requirements of the productive human resources in our country. The IDB could also work in this, but it needs the complementarity of other organization. All these efforts, if they are properly organized with the General Secretariat of the OAS to be a guiding north, we would have a synergy that would be very important, that would give us the importance, that gives an extraordinary technology, communication, artificial intelligence, and transparency, access to information, participation of the citizens, communication, and digital e-commerce. I hope that in the near future we will be able to find each other in the Francisco Saran room, recognized by Central American heroes and the principle of democracy in the region. Honduras thanks you for this distinction as the recognition that you have given us. Thank you very much, colleagues. Thank you to the OAS for this enormous effort that we must do together. Thank you.
It's not only for the impactfulness of his statement, but for the fact that he managed to keep it all within the time limit. And I now give the floor to the representative of Jamaica, His Excellency, the Minister of State in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Leslie Campbell. Mr. Campbell, you have the floor.
President of the General Assembly, the Honorable Darren Henfield, distinguished Ministers of Foreign Affairs, Secretary General of the Organization of American States, Your Excellency Louis Almagro, Assistant Secretary General, Your Excellency Nestor Mendez, Madam Chair of the Permanent Council, Your Excellency Overio Audrey Marks, Your Excellencies, Permanent Representatives to the Organization of American States, other distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen all. Mr. President, I extend warmest congratulations on your appointment as President of this historic 50th anniversary of the regular session of this Assembly. Let me congratulate the Secretary General and the Assistant Secretary General on being reappointed. This year marks 51 years since Jamaica became a member of the OAS, and we acknowledge the valuable role the organization has played in supporting the attainment of our national development, as well as that of the entire region. We look forward to continuing this productive partnership, working assiduously to overcome the many challenges, none greater than the debilitating effects of the current pandemic. The theme, Facing the Challenges of COVID-19 in the Hemisphere, a collaborative approach to address vulnerabilities and build resilience in times of crisis, based on the 4 pillars of the OAS, is therefore not only appropriate, but most timely. Mr. President, experience demonstrates the tremendous benefits of a multilateral approach to dealing with global challenges. We welcome the various partnerships being forged to develop an effective vaccine. Regrettably, we have observed some indications of unilateralism, which could lead to more advanced countries benefiting from the rollout of a vaccine, leaving vulnerable developing countries to face the ravages of the pandemic. We, the members of the OAS, must therefore underscore the issue of equitable access to any vaccine so that we can all rebound in a systematic manner. We truly appreciate the support given by the OAS and affiliate bodies since the onset of the pandemic. Jamaica is particularly grateful to PAHO for its exemplary leadership and the provision of equipment such as ventilators, PPEs, and sanitizing supplies, working in collaboration with other partners. We also look forward to further collaboration with our development partners in assisting countries to respond effectively to the impact of the pandemic. Mr. President, prior to the advent of COVID-19, Jamaica made remarkable strides in achieving sustained economic growth. We had achieved commendable macroeconomic stability, notable reductions in public debt, significant poverty alleviation, increased employment and social protection for the vulnerable. These gains allowed the government to provide a stimulus package to assist the population most severely affected by the pandemic. The crisis, however, has had a devastating impact on our social and economic sector. Health, finance, security, agriculture, education, trade, investment, and particularly tourism, which is a major pillar of the economies of the Caribbean. Another concern is the immense strain on our health services, especially as we seek to treat and protect those most affected. Our women, children, and the aged are also very vulnerable to neglect, while the mental health of many citizens is also at risk. The pandemic has resulted in severe threat to business activity and employment, particularly in tourism and agricultural sectors, and it has impacted national security. The capacity of small middle-income Caribbean countries, such as ours, that are dependent on a few industries to effectively manage the crisis, is compounded by the lack of access to concessional financing. Acknowledging the OAS as the foremost hemispheric multilateral body, we welcome efforts by Secretary General Almagro to engage CARICOM countries, for empathizing with our concerns, and for lending his voice to bring attention to our peculiar circumstances in the global halls of power. And so, Mr. President, what are the next steps? As we adjust to the new realities in the COVID-19 era, there's need to realign our priorities, including the wholesale digitization of our societies. Central to this is human development and business continuity, which has largely moved online. In addition to our schools, our health centers, commerce, security, civic and art organizations also need reliable internet connections. As a consequence, those without internet connectivity are extremely disadvantaged and likely to be left behind if immediate and effective remedial actions are not taken. We welcome the efforts of the OAS to support member states in addressing the connectivity challenges facing our education sectors. Training opportunities on transforming the way we conduct our business affairs have been particularly welcome. We also urge the IDB, the World Bank Group, and others in the position to do so, to work with governments throughout the region to provide assistance to increase connectivity, especially in our rural communities. Mr. President, our aspirations cannot be achieved without a robust energy sector. Last February, Jamaica hosted the 4th ministerial meeting of the Energy and Climate Partnership of the Americas. We are pleased that the focus of the deliberations on energy resilience and investment opportunities has helped to chart a way forward for the region. We cannot lose the momentum generated by the meeting to launch further discussions on the diversification of our energy mix and, importantly, to identify global partners for the development of our energy infrastructure. It is also imperative that we find creative ways to revitalize our tourism sectors and to facilitate increased travel by air and sea via safe channels. Jamaica is pleased by the success achieved in the creation of these 3 tourism resilient corridors, where visitors are able to enjoy all the tourism products without fear of any undue exposure to or the transmission of the COVID-19 virus. We have received international commendations for this innovative approach to rebuilding our tourism industry in the midst of the pandemic. The unprecedented nature of the virus and the urgent need for its containment has preoccupied our attention to the extent that other issues of concern have been relegated to the sidelines. We must remain focused on the issues which, left unattended, can threaten our very existence. I refer in particular to climate change, disaster risk management, food and energy security, non-communicable diseases, and transnational organized crime. We must also ensure that our established systems of democracy, as well as the fundamental human rights of all our peoples, are protected. We cannot lose sight of these imperatives. Mr. President, in closing, I want to reiterate Jamaica's unwavering commitment to finding solutions at the national, regional, and multilateral levels to respond effectively to this pandemic. This 50th regular session of the OAS calls for a collective commitment to redouble our efforts to transform multiple challenges into opportunities that can lead to workable solutions that address vulnerabilities and build resilience. As a community, we must combine our efforts with those of the global community in a sustained manner to identify effective remedial action. We owe no less to the present and future generations of the Americas. I thank you.
And I thank the distinguished Minister of State of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Jamaica, Leslie Campbell. And at 4 minutes to 7, I think we have come to the end of today's session. I thank all of the delegations for their patience in being here throughout this very long day. Thank the Secretariat staff, both those that we can see and those that we can't, for making this meeting possible. Despite this has been the first virtual meeting of a General Assembly, and I think the Secretariat deserves congratulations for pulling it off. It's been very well done. It had some glitches, but not the Secretariat's fault. And hopefully we can go through another day tomorrow in which make progress and do so with no technical difficulties whatsoever. I thank you all for spending the day with us. Thank the Secretariat staff again, Secretary General, Assistant Secretary General, and I remind you that we start again tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock. It's an early start, but we've got a lot to do. So we look forward to seeing you all then, and thank you all very much. Today's session is now concluded. Thank you all.